The letter arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, certified mail with that familiar green border that made my stomach sink before I even opened it. I stood in my driveway in Eagle Ridge, Colorado, holding the envelope while my propane supplier's truck finished filling my tank. Mike, the delivery guy I had known for 3 years, waved as he climbed back into his vehicle. I waved back absent-mindedly, already tearing open the letter. "Dear Mr. Quincy Garrison," it began in that overly formal tone that HOA letters always seem to carry. "It has come to the attention of the Eagle Ridge Community Association Board that you have secured a propane supplier offering rates significantly below standard market value. Per Article 14, Section C of the Community Bylaws, any resident who obtains goods or services beneficial to the community at preferential rates must make those resources available to all residents upon request." I read it 3 times, standing there in my driveway like an idiot. The sun beat down on my neck, and I could feel sweat forming under my collar despite the cool September air at this altitude. My phone rang. I did not even need to look at the caller ID. "Mr. Garrison, this is Barbara Whitmore from the HOA board. I assume you received our letter." Barbara. Of course it was Barbara. The woman had made it her personal mission to regulate every aspect of life in Eagle Ridge since moving here 2 years ago. She was in her late 40s, drove a white Lexus SUV that was always immaculate, and had that particular haircut that seemed to be standard issue for women who enjoyed complaining to managers. "I just opened it," I said, walking toward my front door. "And I have to say, this is the most ridiculous thing I have read in a while. I assure you it is perfectly within the board's authority. We have reviewed the bylaws extensively with our attorney. Barbara, I negotiated my propane rates. That is called capitalism. It is how business works. And when those negotiations benefit you at the expense of the community, it becomes a community matter." I stopped at my front door, keys in hand. "At the expense of the community? How does me getting a good deal hurt anyone? You are creating inequality within the community. The Hendersons pay $300 more per fill than you do. The Matsudas are paying even more. It is creating tension and resentment. Then maybe they should negotiate better deals too," I said, pushing my door open harder than necessary. "That is precisely why we need you to share your supplier information and ensure all residents can access the same rates you receive." I walked into my kitchen and set the letter on the counter. My dog, a golden retriever named Chester, padded over for attention. I scratched his ears while trying to keep my voice level. "Barbara, I spent 6 months researching suppliers, comparing rates and negotiating terms. I am not required to do everyone else's homework for them. Actually, according to Article 14, Section C, you are. We will need the supplier information and contact details by Friday. We will also need you to facilitate introductions to ensure the rates transfer." Something in her tone made my jaw clench. It was not just the demand. It was the assumption that she had the right to make it. And if I refuse, then we will be forced to assess fines in accordance with the bylaws. $50 per day until compliance is achieved. I hung up. Not my finest moment, but the alternative was saying something I would regret. The thing was, my propane deal was not luck or some secret connection. 3 years ago, when I moved into Eagle Ridge, I had done exactly what I told Barbara. I researched. I called 17 different propane suppliers across Colorado. I compared delivery fees per gallon costs, tank rental options, and seasonal price fluctuations. I finally found Mountain Valley Propane, a small company based out of Carbondale, about 2 hours west. They were a family operation, owned by an older couple named Jim and Linda Patterson. Their prices were reasonable, but what really sold me was their willingness to negotiate contracts for reliable customers. I offered them a deal. Guaranteed minimum purchase amounts, advance payment schedules, and flexible delivery windows that let them route me efficiently. In exchange, they gave me a rate that was 30% below the typical market price. It was good business for both of us. Now Barbara wanted to force me to share that relationship, probably destroy the exclusivity that made my rates possible, and somehow expected me to smile and comply. Friday came faster than I wanted. I had ignored 2 more calls from Barbara and 1 from another board member, Richard Stevens. The letter that arrived Friday afternoon informed me that my first fine would be assessed on Monday if I had not complied. I spent the weekend fuming. Chester got extra long walks because I needed to burn off energy. On Saturday, I drove up to Carbondale to talk to Jim Patterson in person. The Mountain Valley Propane office was a small building attached to their storage facility. Jim was in his late 60s, weathered from decades of outdoor work, with the kind of calloused handshake that told you everything about a man's character. "Quincy," he said, waving me into his cramped office. "What brings you up here? Everything okay with your service?" "Service is perfect, Jim." "I am having HOA problems." I explained the situation while Jim leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening with each sentence. "They want to force you to share our contact. More than that, they want me to ensure everyone gets the same rate." Jim shook his head. "Your rate is based on your contract terms, the advance payments, the flexible scheduling. We cannot offer that to everyone, especially not to a whole subdivision at once. It would mess up our entire routing system." "I know. And if I give them your information, they are going to call you and demand those rates without understanding why they exist. This HOA got any legal standing for this. They claim it is in the bylaws. Article 14, Section C, something about sharing beneficial resources." Jim pulled out his phone and spent a few minutes typing. "I am not a lawyer, but this sounds like overreach to me. You negotiated a private contract. That is not community property." "That is what I think, but they are threatening $50 a day fines. Sounds like harassment." Jim drummed his fingers on his desk. "Look, I will support whatever you decide, but I got to tell you, if a whole subdivision starts demanding your rates, I cannot do it. We are a small operation. We built your rate structure around your specific contract." I drove back to Eagle Ridge with a growing sense of anger. This was not about fairness or community benefit. This was about control. Barbara saw someone operating independently and could not stand it. Monday morning, I got an email confirming my first fine assessment. $50, charged to the HOA dues account they automatically drafted from my bank. I called the bank and blocked the HOA's drafting authority. Then I sent Barbara an email. "I am contesting the fine as arbitrary and capricious. The bylaw you are citing does not apply to privately negotiated contracts. I will continue to contest any additional fines. If the board wishes to pursue this matter, I suggest we resolve it through proper legal channels." Her response came within an hour. "Mr. Garrison, blocking HOA payments is a violation of your deed restrictions. This will result in additional penalties and potential lien proceedings. I strongly suggest you reconsider your position. This is not a battle you want to fight." That last line did it. The threat. The assumption that she held all the cards. I spent Monday evening reading the Eagle Ridge HOA bylaws cover to cover. All 73 pages of dense legal text. Article 14, Section C was buried in a section about shared resources and community amenities. The language was vague, clearly written to give the board maximum flexibility. But here was the thing about vague language. It cut both ways. Tuesday morning, I called my attorney, David Park, who had handled my home purchase. I explained the situation over coffee at a shop in downtown Eagle Ridge. "They are on shaky ground," David said, reviewing the bylaw on his tablet. This section was probably intended for things like group purchasing programs or shared contractors. Forcing you to disclose a privately negotiated contract is a stretch. Can they fine me? They can try. Whether it would hold up if challenged is another question. But here is the thing, Quincy. Fighting this through legal channels could take months and cost thousands in legal fees. Even if you win, you are still living in a community where you have made enemies of the HOA board. So what do you suggest? David took a sip of his coffee. Honestly, I would give them the supplier information. Let them call, get quotes, realize the rates do not transfer, and move on with your life. I understood his logic. It was practical advice, but something about it stuck in my throat. What if there was another option? I said. What do you mean? What if I could solve this in a way that teaches them a lesson? David raised an eyebrow. I am listening. I spent the next week doing research. Mountain Valley Propane was a small company, but they had good bones. 2 delivery trucks, a solid customer base in the western Colorado area, and clean books according to the public records I could access. Jim Patterson was in his late 60s. Linda was dealing with health issues. They had been talking about retirement, according to a conversation we had last year. The question was whether they would be willing to sell. I drove back to Carbondale the following Saturday. Jim was surprised to see me again so soon. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Jim, have you and Linda ever thought seriously about selling the business?" His expression shifted from surprise to caution. "We have talked about it. Why?" "Because I might be interested in buying it." We spent 3 hours talking. Jim laid out the business finances, the equipment status, the customer contracts, and the operational challenges. Linda joined us halfway through, and I explained what was happening with my HOA. "So you want to buy our company because your HOA is being difficult?" Linda asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I want to buy your company because it is a solid business. You are looking to retire, and yes, it would solve my HOA problem in a very satisfying way." Jim laughed. "I like this kid, Linda." We talked numbers. The business was worth about $450,000 based on assets, contracts, and projected revenue. I did not have that kind of cash lying around, but I had equity in my house, savings, and investment accounts. More importantly, I had worked in business finance before moving to Colorado for a remote position. I knew how to structure a deal. "I will need to bring in a business loan for part of this," I said. "But I can put down $100,000 cash, and we can structure the rest with seller financing if that works for you." Jim and Linda exchanged looks. "Let us think about it," Jim said. "This is not a decision we can make on the spot. Take your time. But just so you know, my HOA is currently fining me $50 a day, so my timeline is somewhat motivated." Linda smiled. "I can see why." I drove home with my heart pounding. This was either the smartest move I had ever made or completely insane, possibly both. The following week, the HOA fines continued. Barbara sent increasingly aggressive emails. On Thursday, I received a formal notice that if I did not comply within 10 days, they would place a lien on my property. Friday afternoon, Jim called. "Linda and I talked it over. We are interested. If you can put together financing, we are willing to sell." I spent the next 3 weeks in a blur of activity. I met with business loan officers at 3 different banks. I hired an accountant to review Mountain Valley Propane's books. David Park helped me structure the purchase agreement. I spent evenings and weekends creating a business plan, learning about propane distribution regulations, and figuring out how to run a company I had known nothing about a month earlier. The HOA fines hit $450. Barbara left a voicemail saying the board would vote on the property lien at their next meeting. 4 weeks after my initial conversation with Jim, we signed the papers. Mountain Valley Propane was mine. I became the owner of a propane distribution company on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, I had met with the 2 employees Jim had, learned the delivery routes, and started understanding the operational side of the business. By Friday, I had rebranded some of the materials and set up a new business email account. Monday morning, I sent Barbara an email. Dear Mrs. Whitmore, I am writing to inform you that I have complied with the board's request to share my propane supplier information. I am the owner of Mountain Valley Propane, based in Carbondale, Colorado. We would be happy to discuss service contracts with any Eagle Ridge residents interested in switching suppliers. Please find attached our standard commercial rate sheet. Best regards, Quincy Garrison, owner, Mountain Valley Propane. The rate sheet I attached showed prices that were double what I had been paying under my personal contract. Barbara called within an hour. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that one go too. The third time I answered. Mr. Garrison, what exactly is this rate sheet you sent me? Those are our standard commercial rates, Barbara. You wanted my supplier information. There it is. These rates are higher than what most residents are currently paying. Yes, they are premium service rates. Mountain Valley Propane offers superior customer service, flexible delivery scheduling, and guaranteed supply contracts. Quality costs money. This is absurd. You are deliberately pricing these rates to be unusable. Not at all. These are legitimate market rates for the service level we provide. If residents prefer cheaper options, they are welcome to use other suppliers. That is how the free market works, Barbara. Something I mentioned in our first conversation. Silence on the other end of the line. You did this on purpose, she finally said. I provided exactly what the board demanded. My supplier information. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a business to run. I hung up and allowed myself a smile. Chester looked up from his bed in the corner of my home office, tail wagging. She is not going to let this go, I told him. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I received a notice that my fines and the proposed lien would be discussed. I marked my calendar and started preparing. The meeting was held at the Eagle Ridge Community Center, a modern building near the subdivision entrance. About 30 residents attended, along with the 5 board members. Barbara sat at the center of the board table, flanked by Richard Stevens and 3 other members I recognized but had never spoken to directly. I took a seat in the 3rd row. Several neighbors nodded at me. Tom Henderson, who lived 4 houses down, gave me a sympathetic look. Barbara called the meeting to order and worked through standard business. Landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules, upcoming community events. Finally, she reached the agenda item labeled Garrison Property Matter. As many of you know, Barbara began, her voice taking on that particular tone people use when they want to sound reasonable. We have been working with Mr. Garrison regarding his propane supplier arrangements. Working with is generous, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Several people chuckled. Barbara's face tightened. The board determined that Mr. Garrison's private arrangements created inequality within the community. We asked him to share his supplier information so all residents could benefit from similar rates. Which I did, I said. I provided complete supplier information and rate sheets. At rates that are deliberately inflated and unusable, Barbara shot back. at standard commercial rates that reflect the actual cost of doing business. Richard Stevens leaned forward. Mr. Garrison, it is clear you purchased this company specifically to avoid complying with the board's reasonable request. I purchased a company because it was a solid business opportunity. The fact that it also demonstrated the absurdity of the board's overreach was a bonus. The room erupted in conversation. Barbara banged her gavel. The board has assessed over $1,000 in fines against Mr. Garrison for his non-compliance. We are prepared to place a lien on his property if these fines are not paid. David Park stood up from his seat near the back. May I address the board? Barbara looked annoyed but nodded. I am David Park, Mr. Garrison's attorney. I want to inform the board that any attempt to place a lien based on these fines will be immediately challenged in court. The bylaw you are citing, Article 14, Section C, does not grant authority to compel disclosure of private business contracts. Furthermore, Mr. Garrison has technically complied by providing his supplier information. The fact that the board is unhappy with the rates offered is not a basis for continued penalties. The spirit of the bylaw was clear, Barbara said. The law does not operate on spirit, Mrs. Whitmore. It operates on text, and the text does not support your position. Tom Henderson stood up. Can I say something? Barbara looked like she wanted to refuse but nodded curtly. This whole thing is ridiculous, Tom said. Quincy negotiated a good deal. Instead of congratulating him or learning from him, the board decided to punish him. Now you are threatening liens over propane. This is exactly the kind of overreach that makes people hate HOAs. Several residents applauded. Barbara's face was turning red. We are trying to ensure fairness, she said, by punishing success. Another resident called out. How does that make sense? The meeting devolved into arguments. Residents began voicing complaints about other board decisions. The landscaping contract that seemed overpriced. The pool rules that were overly restrictive. The constant flow of violation notices for minor issues. Barbara tried to regain control, but the room had turned against her. After 20 minutes of chaos, she called for a recess. The board members huddled in a corner while residents milled around, talking in animated groups. David approached me. That went well. Did it? They are not going to pursue the lien. Too much potential liability, and now they have lost the room. My guess is they will drop the fines and pretend this never happened. He was half right. After the recess, Barbara announced that the board would table the lien discussion pending further legal review. The fines would remain, but enforcement would be suspended. It was not a complete victory, but it was enough. For now. What I did not expect was what happened next. Over the following week, I received 7 calls from Eagle Ridge residents asking about propane service. Not at the rates on the sheet I sent Barbara, but asking if there was room for negotiation. I met with each of them. I explained how my original rates worked, the advance payment structure, the flexible delivery windows, the guaranteed minimums. Some of them were not interested once they understood the requirements, but 3 of them were. Tom Henderson was one. Sarah Matsuda was another. The third was a newer resident named Chris Donovan who had a large property and used propane for heating, cooking, and a backup generator. I structured contracts similar to my original arrangement with Jim. In exchange for their commitment and flexibility, I gave them rates that were 20% below their current suppliers. Not as good as my personal rate, but significantly better than what they were paying. It made good business sense. The more customers I had in Eagle Ridge, the more efficient my delivery routes became. The advance payments improved cash flow. The contracts gave me guaranteed revenue. Within a month, I had 5 Eagle Ridge customers. Within 2 months, it was 9. Barbara did not call or email, but I saw her watching when my Mountain Valley propane truck made deliveries in the subdivision. Her expression was not pleasant. Running the business was harder than I expected. Jim stayed on as a consultant for 3 months, teaching me the operational details. I learned about bulk purchasing, delivery logistics, equipment maintenance, and customer service. I hired a part-time office manager to handle scheduling and billing. The work was demanding, but I enjoyed it. There was something satisfying about building something real, about seeing the direct results of good decisions. 4 months after buying the company, I had grown the customer base by 15%. I had upgraded one of the delivery trucks. I had hired a third driver to handle increased demand. I was making more money than I had in my previous remote finance job, and I was having more fun doing it. Then in December, Barbara struck back. The letter was delivered by courier on a Friday afternoon. It informed me that the HOA board had approved a new bylaw amendment, effective immediately. Article 18, Section F stated that all commercial vehicles over a certain weight limit were prohibited from parking on residential streets in Eagle Ridge for more than 30 minutes during delivery operations. My propane delivery truck exceeded that weight limit. The penalty for violations was $250 per incident. I read the letter 3 times, feeling anger build in my chest. This was targeted directly at my business. There was no other commercial activity in Eagle Ridge that used vehicles of that size. I called David Park. Can they do this? They can pass reasonable regulations for the community. The question is whether this is reasonable or whether it is targeted harassment. It is obviously targeted harassment, David. This bylaw did not exist until I started delivering propane to other residents. Proving that in court is different than knowing it. We would need to show discriminatory intent. The timing is pretty damning, maybe, but HOAs have broad authority to regulate community standards. Weight limits on vehicles is not inherently unreasonable. I hung up feeling frustrated. Barbara had found a way to strike back that looked legitimate on the surface. The first fine arrived the following week. My driver, Paul, had taken 45 minutes to complete a delivery to Tom Henderson due to equipment issues. The HOA sent a notice with time-stamped photos showing the truck on the street past the 30-minute limit. $250. I paid it and told Paul to be careful about timing. But propane delivery was not always predictable. Equipment could be finicky. Customers sometimes had questions or issues that took time to address. Weather could slow things down. 2 more fines arrived over the next 3 weeks, $500 down the drain. I drove to Tom Henderson's house one evening. He answered the door looking sympathetic. "I heard about the fines," he said. "This is because you are delivering to me, right? The bylaws apply to all commercial vehicles, but yeah, my business is the only one affected. What can we do? I am working on it. I just wanted to let you know that I might need to change how we handle deliveries. Maybe schedule them for times when I can be more certain about the duration. Whatever you need, Quincy. I appreciate what you are doing. Your rates have saved me over $1,000 already." That conversation gave me an idea. I reached out to all my Eagle Ridge customers and explained the situation. Then I proposed a solution. Instead of parking delivery trucks on residential streets, what if I arranged to use a staging area outside the subdivision? Customers could meet me there for fills, or I could use smaller equipment that did not violate the weight limits for the final delivery. It was less convenient, but it worked. I purchased a smaller propane transfer unit that could be pulled by a standard pickup truck. I would fill it from the main delivery truck at a staging area I rented a mile from Eagle Ridge. Then use the smaller unit for the final delivery into the subdivision. It added time and complexity, but it avoided the fines. Barbara had to have noticed, but there was nothing in the bylaws that prevented my workaround. Business continued growing through the winter. The smaller equipment was actually an asset when I started picking up customers in other subdivisions with similar access challenges. What started as a defensive move became a competitive advantage. By March, Mountain Valley Propane had grown by 30% compared to when I bought it. I had hired another driver and leased a third delivery truck. The business was solidly profitable. Then one of my new Eagle Ridge customers, Chris Donovan, called with an interesting piece of information. "You know the Henderson family is thinking about selling their house, right?" I did not. "Are they moving?" Tom said something about job relocation, but here is the interesting part. Barbara approached them about buying it. Barbara Whitmore. Yeah. She apparently wants to expand her investment property portfolio. Tom thought it was weird given how much tension there has been over the HOA stuff. Something about that set off alarm bells. I thanked Chris and hung up, thinking, Barbara buying the Henderson house made no sense from a normal investment perspective. Tom's house was nice but not exceptional. The market in Eagle Ridge was stable but not booming. If Barbara was looking for investment properties, there were better options. Unless she had another motive, I called Tom directly. "Hey, Quincy. Chris already told you, huh? About Barbara wanting to buy your place." "Yeah, can I ask why you are considering it?" "She made a good offer. 20,000 over my asking price, all cash, quick close." It is hard to turn down given the job situation. "Did she say what she plans to do with the property?" "Rental," she said. "But honestly, I do not really care as long as the money is good." We talked for a few more minutes, then I hung up. I spent the evening thinking about angles. Why would Barbara pay over market value for Tom's house? The rental income would not justify the price, unless she was not planning to rent it. Then it hit me. Tom's house was one of my largest propane customers. His property had an old heating system that used significant amounts of propane. Plus, he ran a workshop that used propane for various tools and equipment. If Barbara owned the property, she could cancel the propane contract with me. One less Mountain Valley customer in Eagle Ridge. One less delivery truck route justification. It seemed petty and expensive just to hurt my business. But I had learned that Barbara did not think like a rational businessperson. She thought like someone who needed to win, no matter the cost. I called Tom back. "How committed are you to selling?" "Pretty committed." "The job in Denver is a good opportunity. What if I matched Barbara's offer? Silence on the other end. "You want to buy my house. I want to make sure whoever buys it is not doing it to mess with my business." "Quincy, that is a lot of money to spend just to spite Barbara." "It is also a solid investment property, and yes, there is an element of spite, but mostly I do not want to let her win this particular game." Tom laughed. "You know what? I respect that. Let me talk to my wife." 2 days later, Tom called back. His wife had agreed. If I could match Barbara's offer with the same terms, they would sell to me. I met with my business banker and a mortgage broker. With the equity in my current house and the business income, I could swing the financing. It would be tight but doable. I made the offer. Tom accepted. Barbara found out when Tom told her he had accepted another offer. According to Tom, she was furious. She called him multiple times trying to change his mind, even offering more money. But the contract was signed. The closing was scheduled for mid-April. 2 weeks before closing, I got a call from Richard Stevens, the HOA board vice president. "Quincy, I wanted to reach out about something." "What is it, Richard?" "The board has been discussing some concerns about commercial property ownership in Eagle Ridge." We are considering a bylaw that would limit the number of properties any single commercial entity can own in the subdivision. You cannot be serious. It is about maintaining the residential character of the community. Richard, cut the crap. This is Barbara trying to block me from buying Tom's house. I am just giving you a heads up. The vote is scheduled for next week. There is no legal basis for blocking property purchases by commercial entities. That is restraint of trade. The HOA has the authority to regulate property use and ownership structures within reason. This is not within reason. This is targeted harassment, and if the board votes for it, I will sue every member personally. Richard was quiet for a moment. I am sorry, Quincy. I voted against it, for what it is worth. But Barbara has the votes. The bylaw passed 3-2 at the next board meeting. It limited any single commercial entity to owning no more than one residential property in Eagle Ridge. Since Mountain Valley Propane was an LLC and I was purchasing the Henderson property under the business name for liability reasons, the bylaw would block the sale. David Park reviewed the bylaw and shook his head. This is blatant overreach, but fighting it will take time. Months, probably. The closing is in 2 weeks. Can we close under my personal name instead? Possibly, but that exposes you to personal liability and could complicate the business relationship. I spent 2 days working through options. Finally, I called Tom with a proposal. What if we structure this differently? I buy the house in my personal name. I continue operating Mountain Valley Propane as the supplier. You get your money, I get the property, and the HOA's bylaw does not apply. Works for me, man. I just want to close and move on. We restructured the deal. David handled the paperwork. The closing went through on schedule. I became the owner of 2 houses in Eagle Ridge. The day after closing, I received a letter from Barbara. Mr. Garrison, it has come to the board's attention that you now own multiple properties in Eagle Ridge. We wanted to remind you that HOA fees apply to each property separately. Additionally, the board is monitoring both properties for any code violations or unauthorized commercial use. The letter was petty but expected. I paid the HOA fees for both properties and made sure everything was in perfect compliance. Then I listed my original house for sale. If I was going to own property in Eagle Ridge, I preferred to own the house with the better propane infrastructure. Tom's place was larger, had better workshop space, and was positioned more efficiently for my delivery routes. My house sold in 3 weeks to a family moving from Texas. Nice people with 2 kids. They were not interested in propane drama or HOA politics. Perfect. By May, I was fully moved into the former Henderson property. Chester loved the bigger yard. I loved the extra space for both living and business operations. Mountain Valley Propane was having its best year ever. The customer base had grown by 50%. Revenue was up accordingly. I was considering expanding into neighboring communities. Barbara had gone quiet. No letters, no calls, no new bylaws targeting my business. The subdivision settled into an uneasy peace. Then in June, everything changed. Chris Donovan called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice urgent. Quincy, you need to see this. I am forwarding you an email. The email arrived a moment later. It was a message sent to multiple Eagle Ridge residents from an account called Eagle Ridge Watch. The message claimed that Mountain Valley Propane was operating with expired safety certifications, and that I had bribed inspectors to overlook violations. It was complete fiction. My certifications were current and publicly verifiable. I had never bribed anyone, but the damage was done. 3 customers called within an hour asking about the allegations. 2 more sent emails requesting documentation of safety compliance. I spent the morning gathering paperwork and sending responses. Every certification was current. Every inspection had been passed legitimately. Every safety standard was met or exceeded, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The next day, another email went out from Eagle Ridge Watch. This one claimed that my delivery practices were environmentally hazardous and that I was dumping waste improperly. Also completely false. The third email arrived on Thursday. This one accused me of tax fraud and operating without proper business licenses. I contacted the Eagle Ridge HOA and asked for information about who controlled the Eagle Ridge Watch email account. They claimed no knowledge of it. I contacted the email provider and tried to get account information. They would not release it without a subpoena. David Park filed a defamation lawsuit against John Doe, allowing us to subpoena the email provider for account information. The legal process would take weeks. Meanwhile, the emails kept coming. Each one made new false accusations. My business was suffering. Customer calls were declining. New prospects were citing the allegations as reasons for concern. I lost 3 customers in 2 weeks. Then I got lucky. One of the Eagle Ridge Watch emails included metadata that had not been properly scrubbed. David's tech investigator was able to trace it to an IP address. The address belonged to Barbara Whitmore's home internet connection. We amended the lawsuit, naming Barbara specifically. We sent her notice of legal action and demanded that the defamatory emails stop. Barbara's attorney responded with a letter claiming that Barbara had nothing to do with the emails and suggesting that her internet had been hacked. But the emails stopped. David filed a motion to compel discovery, requesting Barbara's computer and email records. Her attorney fought it, but eventually the judge ordered limited forensic examination. The examination found drafts of the Eagle Ridge Watch emails on Barbara's personal laptop. Her defense shifted to claiming the emails were protected speech, raising legitimate community concerns. David tore that argument apart. The statements were factual claims, not opinions. They were demonstrably false. They had caused measurable business harm. The case went to mediation in August. Barbara's attorney clearly wanted to settle. Barbara herself was resistant, but facing a trial she would almost certainly lose. We settled for $75,000 in damages, a written apology, and Barbara's resignation from the HOA board. The money barely covered my legal fees and lost business revenue. But the resignation was worth more than any monetary settlement. Barbara fought the resignation requirement, but her attorney convinced her that the alternative was a public trial where her emails would be read in open court. She resigned 2 weeks later. The HOA board held an emergency election to replace her. Richard Stevens became president. His first act was to repeal the commercial vehicle weight restrictions and the property ownership limits. His second act was to rewrite Article 14, Section C to clarify that it applied only to HOA-sponsored group purchasing programs and did not grant authority over private contracts. Life in Eagle Ridge got significantly quieter. Mountain Valley Propane recovered from the damage caused by Barbara's email campaign. The settlement and public apology helped restore confidence. Customer numbers rebounded. By September, I had more customers than before the controversy started. Tom Henderson reached out from Denver to check on how things were going. I filled him in on everything that had happened since he left. "I cannot believe Barbara went that far," he said. "That is legitimately criminal." David thought about pursuing criminal charges but decided the civil case was more effective. She paid and resigned. That is good enough. You are more forgiving than I would be. Maybe I was. Or maybe I just wanted to move on with my life and my business. The fall was busy. Propane demand increased as temperatures dropped. I hired 2 more drivers and leased a 4th delivery truck. We expanded service into 2 neighboring communities. By December, exactly 1 year after buying the company, Mountain Valley Propane's revenue had doubled compared to the previous year under Jim's ownership. I invited Jim and Linda to a dinner celebrating the anniversary. We met at a steakhouse in Carbondale, and they beamed when I showed them the financial statements. "You have done amazing things with the business," Jim said. "I knew you had the drive, but this is beyond what I expected." "I had good bones to work with. You built something solid." "We built something sustainable," Linda corrected. "You made it grow. Those are different skills." We talked late into the evening about business, about the HOA drama, about life. Jim and Linda were enjoying retirement, traveling and spending time with grandchildren. They had no regrets about selling. As I drove home that night, I thought about how much had changed in a year. I had gone from a remote finance worker dealing with HOA overreach to a business owner running a successful company. Barbara had tried to force me to share resources I had earned through work and negotiation. Instead, I had bought the company, grown it, and outlasted her attempts at retaliation. The irony was that more Eagle Ridge residents were benefiting from my propane service than if I had simply given them contact information. I had 9 regular customers in the subdivision now, all paying rates better than their alternatives. I was incentivized to provide good service because they were part of my core business. That was how markets were supposed to work. Mutual benefit through voluntary exchange. Barbara had tried to impose a command and control solution. It had failed spectacularly. The spring brought new challenges. Regulatory changes in Colorado's propane industry required updated equipment and additional training. I invested in both, keeping Mountain Valley ahead of compliance requirements. Richard Stevens and I developed a friendly working relationship. The new HOA board was focused on actual community improvements rather than controlling residents' private business arrangements. The subdivision installed new playground equipment, repaved the main roads, and organized community events that people actually enjoyed. Attendance at HOA meetings increased because residents felt heard rather than dictated to. In May, Sarah Matsuda approached me at a community barbecue. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" "For standing up to Barbara. I know it cost you time and money and stress. But watching you fight back inspired a lot of us to be more engaged with the HOA. That is why Richard got elected. That is why things are better now." I had not thought about it that way. I had been focused on my business and my own situation, but Sarah was right. The changes in Eagle Ridge went beyond propane rates and HOA bylaws. Residents were more engaged because they saw that speaking up mattered. That pushing back against overreach worked. That they did not have to accept unreasonable demands just because they came from an authority structure. That was worth something. 2 years after buying Mountain Valley Propane, the business was firmly established as a regional leader. We served over 300 customers across 4 counties. Revenue exceeded $2 million annually. I employed 8 people full-time and 2 part-time. I still lived in Eagle Ridge. I still operated under the HOA bylaws. But now, I did so as an engaged member of the community rather than someone just trying to avoid hassles. I joined the Architectural Review Committee, helping establish reasonable guidelines for home improvements that maintained property values without being needlessly restrictive. I sponsored the Youth Soccer League and funded new equipment for the community center. I was building something that mattered, both in business and in community. and every time I saw a Mountain Valley propane truck making a delivery in Eagle Ridge, I smiled. It was a reminder that sometimes the right response to unreasonable demands was not compliance or surrender. Sometimes it was buying the damn company and showing them how business actually worked. Barbara Whitmore moved away from Eagle Ridge in the fall. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she had taken an HOA board position in a different community in Arizona. I felt sorry for those residents, but that was not my problem anymore. Chester was getting gray around the muzzle, and I had been thinking about getting him a companion dog. The house had plenty of space. Business was stable enough that I could handle the additional responsibility. Life was good. Not perfect, but good. I had built something real through hard work, smart decisions, and refusing to back down when someone tried to push me around for no good reason. The propane business kept growing. In my third year, I opened a second location to better serve the expanding customer base. I hired a general manager to handle day-to-day operations, freeing me up for strategic planning and business development. I never forgot the lesson from that first certified letter. HOAs had legitimate purposes, but they could also be vehicles for petty tyranny when the wrong people got control. The answer was not avoiding HOAs or just grumbling about them. The answer was engagement, showing up to meetings, running for the board, holding leadership accountable, making sure the community government actually served the community. It was work. It was sometimes frustrating. But it was necessary. And occasionally, it meant buying a company and doubling their delivery rates just to prove a point. 3 years after the whole situation started, I was sitting on my back deck watching Chester and his new companion, a golden retriever puppy named Bailey, play in the yard. My phone rang. It was Jim Patterson. "Quincy, I hope I am not interrupting anything. Just enjoying the evening. What is up?" I got a call today from a buddy of mine who runs a propane company over in Wyoming. He is looking to sell and retire. Thought you might be interested in expanding Mountain Valley's territory. I sat up straighter. "Tell me more." We talked for 30 minutes about the opportunity. The Wyoming company was similar in size to what Mountain Valley had been when I bought it. Good customer base, solid infrastructure, owner ready to retire. It would be a significant expansion. More trucks, more employees, more complexity. Also more revenue, more market presence, more long-term value. "Send me the details," I said. "Let me review the numbers." After we hung up, I sat looking out at the mountains visible from my deck. 3 years ago, I had been worried about HOA fines and just trying to keep my good propane rate. Now, I was considering multi-state business expansion. Life came at you fast sometimes. The Wyoming acquisition took 6 months to complete. It was more complex than the original purchase, involving interstate business regulations and significantly more capital. But my banker was supportive. The numbers made sense. And by early the following year, Mountain Valley Propane operated in 2 states with nearly 500 customers. I was 34 years old and running a business that employed 15 people and generated over $3 million in annual revenue. Not bad for someone who had just wanted a decent propane rate. Eagle Ridge continued thriving under Richard's HOA leadership. Property values were up. Community satisfaction was high. The neighborhood had become a model for how HOAs could function when they focused on actual community benefit rather than control for its own sake. I still attended meetings. I still served on the architectural committee. I was now part of the governance structure I had once battled against, but it was a better structure now. One that had learned from the mistakes of the Barbara Whitmore era. On a Saturday morning in June, I was working in my garage workshop when a car pulled into the driveway. A woman in her 30s got out, looking around at the property. "Can I help you?" I called out, walking over. "Are you Quincy Garrison?" "I am. My name is Veronica Thompson. I just moved into Eagle Ridge and several neighbors recommended I talk to you about propane service." We talked for 20 minutes. I explained the contract structures, the rates, the service model. Veronica asked good questions and clearly understood what she was getting into. "The neighbors also told me you fought with the old HOA board and won," she said with a smile. "That made me want to meet you regardless of the propane situation. The HOA is much better now. New leadership, new approach." So I heard. "It is one reason I chose this community. I have lived under bad HOAs before. It is refreshing to find one that functions properly." I set Veronica up with a contract. She became customer number 17 in Eagle Ridge. That evening, I made dinner and sat on the back deck with the dogs. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I thought about the journey from that first certified letter to where I was now. The anger, the frustration, the decision to buy the company, the fights with Barbara, the growth of the business, the changes in the community. All of it stemmed from refusing to accept an unreasonable demand and being willing to do something bold in response. I was not naturally confrontational. I did not enjoy conflict, but I had learned that sometimes standing your ground was necessary. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who came after. The other Eagle Ridge residents benefiting from good propane rates, the employees earning livings at Mountain Valley, the community members who saw that engagement mattered. All of that happened because I had pushed back when it would have been easier to just comply. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from Richard Stevens with the minutes from the latest HOA board meeting. Routine stuff, budgets and maintenance schedules. Boring in the best possible way. That was how it should be. An HOA that handled necessary business without drama, that served residents instead of controlling them, that operated with transparency and accountability. It had taken a fight to get there, but it was worth it. Chester came over and put his head on my knee, looking up with those soulful dog eyes. Bailey bounded around the yard, still full of puppy energy. "Good boys," I said, scratching Chester's ears. "Life turned out pretty okay, did it not?" Chester's tail wagged in agreement. The stars were coming out, visible despite the ambient light from the subdivision. I could see the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. This was home. Not just the house, but the community, the business, the life I had built. And it all started because someone tried to force me to share my propane supplier. I could not help but smile at the absurdity and the perfection of it all.